Very good. So we're going to begin tonight with the very last parak of Nazir, and we're fortunate that the parak starts off and discusses various yedios. I think at this point, most of us are Nazired out. Would you say that, Shmuel? Maybe. Okay, you don't have to say it, but I'll say it for you.
I would never say that. I would never say it. I love this Masechta.
Right. It's great, but we're lucky that on Samach Aleph, the new parak, I want to read the Gemara, and I think sometimes it's very important to review various yedios concepts that we have in the Gemara that sometimes we just, quickly glance over, and we don't really appreciate or understand the fine nuances of the law. And we're going to give some examples that the Gemara discusses, and I want to just expand on them a little bit. Okay? So we're going to start the Mishnah. This happened to be the daf for Shabbos, if you missed it. The Mishnah discusses this parak in the beginning. It says, Hakusim ein lahem naziros. So this parak is called Hakusim. Some people call it Hagoyim, because Kuti is usually a term we use for a specific nation that try to integrate into Bnei Yisrael. But the truth is, this is talking about a non-Jew. So for argument's sake, we are going to call them non-Jews. Okay, so the rule is Ein Lahem Naziros. Okay, there is no concept. Now, this doesn't sound like such a bombshell, right? It sounds pretty obvious that everything that we're discussing about all these related topics, about a Nazir and what he can do and what he can't do and what he should do and what he shouldn't do not apply to non-Jews. Okay, now, the Gemara is going to give a reason, a very obvious reason, but the truth is we know that the main concept, now that we're 2 months into Maseches Nazir, we know that a lot of our discussions throughout the weeks, right, throughout the 8 weeks or so, have been focused on the karbanos. So you have to ask yourself, well, a guy probably can't be a Nazir because he can't do the karbanos. Now, most of that statement is true. The problem is a guy, as the Gemara alludes to, not over here, but in other places, a guy, the Gemara Menachos discusses that a guy can bring a voluntary karban called an ola. Okay, so now that we're a little bit more proficient in karbanos from this Masechta, we know that out of all the karbanos, I think the word ola was called earlier in the Masechta a doron. The word doron means a present, right? It means it's not mandatory. You didn't do anything wrong to warrant an ola. So therefore, olas can be an international or a safe karban to be bought by anybody who wants to bring money, who wants to bring a karban. Just like anybody could bring money, anybody could bring a karban, even if you're not necessarily Jewish, if it's a donation. If it's not mandatory, it's optional. However, when it comes to the chatas and the asham, right, the word chatas by definition is brought on a chet, and the word asham, that we would interpret guilt offering, obviously has the word guilt in there. So that means that you did something wrong, right? That's why the Nazir that became Tameh, as we know, brings a karban asham. But he also brings a chatas, and we discussed twice, maybe thrice, why the chatas is brought by the Nazir, because he abstained, right? We had that discussion a few times. But the ola is that animal, is that karban that a guy could bring. So the reason why a guy can't be a Nazir is because he can't bring the 3 karbanos. He can only bring one of them. So I heard a long time ago an interesting explanation as to why only an ola can a non-Jewish person bring. And the answer to that has to do with the karban itself, because again, now that we're, somewhat experts in karbanos, you would know that what separates the ola from all the karbanos is that the ola was kalila Hashem, it was burned completely. Okay, the other karbanos, such as the shlomim, the asham, the chatas, they were all eaten sometimes by the kohen or by the shlomim. It was shared by the kohen and the owner. But whatever it was, there was some what we would call human consumption. The ola is the only one that had a godly consumption. It all went up in flames. And the way I heard it was that's the difference between the way we think and the way the Gentiles, the non-Jewish people think. They cannot relate. They may be very spiritual. That is absolutely true. But they cannot relate to this concept of sharing. Not of sharing, like our children share. Sharing in terms of we have, to them, it's binary. It's either everything to us, right, for us to enjoy, or it's very spiritual to God. This hybrid that we have of part of it going to God and part of it going to the Kohen, for example, is a foreign concept to them. That's why they can't bring anything other than an Ola, because an Ola is completely to God, and that to them makes sense. Once you're sharing, some of it goes to the people, some of it goes to the God, that's something that is more well known to us, right? Ben Adam L'Chavero, Ben Adam L'Makom, we're well-rounded as opposed to the non-Jews who are binary, either all or nothing. So that's a nice vort I heard a long time ago as to why Goyim are not able to bring any karbanot except for the Ola. Okay, so that's the first four words of the perek. Then the Mishnah goes on to say, Nashim ba'avadim yesh lahem nazirus. Women, we know, could become a Nazir. We've had this many times. And an Eved also. Now, what kind of Eved are we talking about? We know that there's an Eved Kanani and an Eved Ivri. Now, an Eved Ivri is a regular run-of-the-mill Jew who just got caught up in some crime and had to be sold, and therefore is an Eved now. But he's a full Jew, no different than any other Jew. So obviously, we're talking about a Eved Kanani. Okay, they actually also have a concept of becoming a Nazir. And the Mishnah ends off by saying that Chomer Banashim Avadim, women are more, when it comes to women versus Avadim, the women are more stringent. Shehu Kofes Avdo, Ve'eno Kofes Ishto. Because if an Eved decides that he wants to become a Nazir and his master doesn't want anything to do with it, he could force him to drink wine, and that's the end of that. His wife, if he lets her become a Nazir after a day, right? This goes back to our discussion in the Durham about what kind of authority the husband has over the wife vis-a-vis making a neder. So we learned that if he let it go for 24 hours, then she's stuck with it, right? He only has one day to veto her vow. And therefore, if he doesn't, so therefore, I can't force my wife once she's already a Nazir after a day, she is stuck with being a Nazir. Okay, so now let's read a little bit of the Gemara. Okay, and we are going to see a related topic, okay, when it comes to this first item the Gemara discusses. Kitani, so the Gemara says, Hakusim ein lahem nazirus minan minali. How do we know that a guy cannot become a Nazir? A non-Jew cannot become a Nazir? Titanu Rabbanan, Daber al b'nei Yisrael. Okay, very simple. How does the Parsha of Nazir and Parsha's Naso start? It says, Daber al b'nei Yisrael. So, v'lo ovdei kochav. So, it says, tell the Jewish people, and obviously, this comes to exclude a non-Jew. Then the pasuk continues, V'amarta aleihem, and tell them the following. So the Gemara says, L'rabos es avadim. From this extra two words, we're going to include an Eved Kanani is, yes, included in the Parsha of Nazir. Great. So we say, Lama likra, why do I need the pasuk to go out of its way and tell me that an Eved Kanani is included? I already know from the fact that a woman is included. So you're going to say, what in the world does a woman have to do with an Eved Kanani? So the answer is, Kol mitzvah sha'isha chayeves ba Eved chayev ba. So this is the first thing I want to discuss a little bit. This is the concept of that a Eved Kanani is equal in a sense to that of a woman. What does that mean? When it comes to the mitzvos, the Torah has a word la by a isha, it says the kas of la sefer krisus, and the Torah has the word la in Parshas Kedoshim. It says by ochub shalonitan la, which is written by a shifcha charufa. I'm not going to go into that now, but either way, the Gemara has a very, very famous gezerah shava that says it says the word la here and it says the word la there. So we compare that an eved has mitzvos like a woman, which means we know that, and women, the Gemara in Kiddushin, Daf Lamed Aleph, learns out from Tefillin and a little bit of help from its friends that women are only chayev in what we call mitzvahs aseh shehazman grama. Okay, they're putter from mitzvos that are time bound, like shofar and like lulav and like tefillin. Those have to do with time. So therefore, women are not obligated. So if a woman is not obligated, an eved is not obligated. Okay, so far so good. So the Gemara says, if that's true, right? If that's true that a eved has the same law as a woman, then why does the pasuk have to exclude? Why does the pasuk have to include an eved? That an Eved Kanani can be a Nazir, if in fact we already know that an Eved Kanani can become a Nazir because a woman could become a Nazir, and the two are equal. So the Gemara answers, I'll tell you. Amar Rava Shani Hacha, Amar Kra Lesor Isar al Nafsho. Okay? The pasuk says by a neder. When you make a neder, like becoming a Nazir again, as we had many, many times, is a form of neder. So when you make a neder, you are taking an isser on your nefesh. So everybody has a nefesh, right? The problem is an Eved Kanani's nefesh doesn't exactly belong to him. Now, we're not talking about the spiritual nefesh. Everybody has their own individual spiritual nefesh. We're talking about more of your body. So, b'misha nafshu kanoyalo, neder is referring to someone whose nefesh is owned by that person. Yatsa eved shei nafshu kanoyalo. The problem is an eved, as much as has his own soul physically, but his body, he is not in complete control of himself because he has a master at the end of the day. And his master could make him do things that he may not necessarily agree to. So this person doesn't have the biblical nefesh, like the Torah proscribes you for being able to make a neder. So since becoming a Nazir is a form of neder, so the Gemara says, I would have thought, because what? Because by a Nazir, right? Because by a neder, this Eved cannot make one. So therefore, maybe he can't become a Nazir because he doesn't have the power and freedom like a regular person. So therefore, he may not become a Nazir. So the Gemara says, you're wrong. Kamash Malan, he can become a Nazir. Okay, so that answers the question of why the Torah had to tell you that a Eved Kanani could become a Nazir, even though I already know it from a Isha. So what's interesting on this note is that the Gemara in Chagiga, Daf Dalid, has a very, very similar question and answer. Okay, I'm reading on Chagiga Daf Dalid, Amud Aleph, right? We had this back about a year ago. Okay, the Torah said, the Gemara says, it says that women, nashim va'avadim, do not have to go ole regel, right? Masechas Chagiga talks about the mitzvah of being ole regel. So the beginning tells you that everybody has to go ole regel, okay, in Eretz Yisrael. There are exceptions, though. Who are the exceptions? Women and slaves. So the Gemara says, I'm on Chagiga Daf Dalid, right toward the bottom. Bishlam and Nashim, I understand women don't have to go because as Xeris HaKasav says, right? Zechurcha. Right? The pasuk says, Yira'eh kol zechurcha, God will see all of your males in the temple. So that's an easy one. All right. So that means that Nashim are not invited. Ella avadim min olam. Why? How do we know that an Eved Kanani doesn't have to go to be Ola Regel? Amar Rafuna Amar Kra El Penei Ha'adon Hashem. So now we're going to bring a pasuk just like we brought the pasuk by the Neder, right? About the Nefesh. So we're going to try to do something very similar, right? The exclusion comes from the word that what do you do when you're Ola Regel? You go and visit Penei Ha'adon Hashem. You visit the Lord's face. Okay, you visit the Lord. Misha ein lo ela adon echad. Someone who is invited to be Ola Regel is somebody who only has one adon. What's the problem with this Eved? This Eved has two adons. Yatzazeh she'ein lo adon acher. Okay, so we're coming to exclude an Eved who has what? Who has another Adon. He has a spiritual Adon and a physical Adon, right? So that's why he doesn't have to go Ola Regel. So the Gemara now asks the same question. Again, the two are equated, right? So halam alikra, michte, kol mitzvah sheha'isha chayiv ba, eved chayiv ba, kol mitzvah she'ena isha chayiv ba, ena eved chayiv ba. Why do I need the pasuk to tell me that a Eved does not have to? Of course he doesn't have to, because a woman doesn't have to. And Nazir was the opposite. A woman can become a Nazir, so therefore an Eved also could become a Nazir. Here we're doing it on the negative. So the Gemara has a different answer, not such important. The Gemara says that we're talking about someone who, the reason why the pasuk tells you Xeris HaKasav, Amar Avinu, lo nitzucha el mishachetzev Eved and chetzev ben chor, we're talking about a half slave. Okay, which is a weird scenario where you have somebody who's owned by two masters. One of them frees him and one of them doesn't. So he's kind of in limbo. So, okay, so that's the end of that discussion, but I'm pointing out because here's another example where the Gemara is harping on equating this Eved Kanani to this woman. Now, is it fair that we're comparing a woman to a slave? Probably not. And if you think about it, it's a little degrading because an Eved Kanani really isn't Jewish. But what happens to an Eved Kanani? It's brought into your home, and when it's in your home, it becomes part of the possession of the homeowner, of the landlord, right, of the master, and it becomes quasi-Jewish, right? It needs to get a bris, and it only has mitzvah. So we're not comparing it because a woman really has much more mitzvahs than an Eved, right? The truth is, women are chayiv in most things. There's only a handful of things that a woman isn't chayiv, most things, because most things are not mitzvahs say shehazman grama. Most aren't shehazman grama. So we're not really comparing the slave to the woman. We're just comparing the halachic aspect of what a woman is chayiv in. So I want to read a little bit because we're talking about an Eved Kanani, and when we're talking about an Eved Kanani, it's important to understand what this is all about. All right, I want to read the Sefer HaMitzvot, okay, because let me get to it. All right, so if you read Mitzvah 347, let me just open it up. Mitzvah number 347 talks about the Eved Kanani. What is the mitzvah in the Torah about an Eved Kanani? So there's one mitzvah in the Torah about an Eved Kanani. It's called La'olam Behem Ta'avodu. Okay, the pasuk in Bahar basically says that when you acquire an Eved Kanani, he has to stay with you forever. Forever. Now, it's actually really until Yovel, but let me read what the Sefer HaChinuch says about the Eved Kanani. He says, mitzvahs avoda be'eved Kanani la'olam. Shene'evad be'eved Kanani la'olam, kloma shlo nishachrer oto la'olam, v'shelo yetzel l'chayrut. When you have an Eved, again, an Eved Ivri is a Jewish person, okay, that did something, and he can't pay back, and now Bezdin is punishing him and says, you are now an Eved. So we know the laws that are what? That an Eved Ivri works for you for 6 years, and if he wants to stay, he's got to pierce his ear. Right? This is the beginning of Parshas Mishpatim, talks about the rules of an Eved Ivri. Okay? An Eved Kanani does not have that kind of freedom. There's one exception, if you remember, in Parshas Mishpatim, something what we call shein va'ayin. If you happen to knock out the eye or the tooth, that's the one exception where the Eved Kanani actually goes free. We'll discuss this hopefully when we get to Maseches Bava Kama. There's a beautiful gra. If you remind me in about a year from now, I'll discuss it with you, what's so special about shein va'ayin. But anyways, they are the only time that you are allowed to free a Eved Kanani. Okay, now we call it Eved Kanani. What does Kanani mean? So Canaanites. Now, so the Sefer HaChinuch says, I have news for you. The Eved Kanani Nikra, Echad Mikol Omer Shekanu Yisrael Abdos. It doesn't have to be a Canaanite, right? It could be Prizi, Chiti, Amori, Yavusi, Girgashi, right? It's just another nation other than the Jewish nation. Aval Nisyachsu Kol Havadim B'Shem Kanaan. Why are all Eved Kanaanim called Kanaanim if they don't come from Canaan? So he says that they adopted the name Kanaan, right? If you remember the story of Noach, Canaan was the bad son. Whatever he did, we're not going to talk about now, but he was the bad one, so he was cursed. Remember what his curse was? His curse was that he would become the slave. So every slave that's a non-Jew adopts the name Eved Kanani. So that's an interesting tidbit of information that you may not have known. Right? So on further, Lav Dafka, it's not specifically Mishpachas Kanaan. It's anything, any other nation has a din of Eved Kanani. So now he goes into the roots of this mitzvah. And I just want to give a little caveat. This is a very harsh description of the Sefer HaChinuch as to what the reason is, again, why you're not allowed to free an Eved Kanani. Okay, I'm just going to read it. Any criticism should not be dealt my way, but speak to the Sefer HaChinuch. I'm just reading what he says, especially in light of today's, culture. This is a very hard one to stomach, but here we go. Mishar Shei HaMitzvah, the reason of this commandment of not being able to let go of an Eved Kanani, Lefisha Am Yisrael hem mivchar hamin ha'enoshi v'nivru lahakir boram u'la'eved lefana v'ru'im lihios lahem avadim l'shamesh osam. He says, because Israel is what we call the Am HaNivchar. You ever hear of the chosen people? Here is a practical, not just something, not a term that we just say in the news. This is a practical halachic concept of where being chosen actually applies lamaisa, as they say. Here it is in the Sefer HaChinuch. He says, because we're chosen, okay, and we were created to recognize lahakir, to recognize the Creator, and to serve in front of the Creator. Okay, you ready for this? Okay, because Israel is the chosen people, and we were created to recognize the Creator and to serve in front of Him, it's fitting that the Jewish people should have slaves to serve them. Again, we need to serve God. So in return, we need to be served, right? We need to be served by them, by the Canaanite slaves, right? It reminds me of that Dylan song, "Gotta Serve Somebody," right? We're serving God, and we're being served by these Canaanite slaves. V'im ein lahem avadim min ha'umos, al kol panim yitzrachu lehishtabed ba'acheihem. And if the Jewish people don't have slaves from other nations at their utility to use, then they would need to make avadim from their own brothers, from their own Jews. Okay? Right? And those who we picked from our own Jews wouldn't be able to serve God, because if we had Jewish slaves, they'd be busy serving us, not God. So therefore, we need help, and the help has to come from non-Jews. Okay, don't ever repeat this in public. Okay, that's the reason why we have to subjugate non-Jews to serve us, to help us serve God on a higher level. Okay, I'm going to continue. Therefore, he says, Al ken itztavinu lahachazik be'elu letashmishenu, achar shehichashru v'nekra avodah zara mipihem v'lo yihiyu lemokesh bevatenu. So we are commanded to retain these avadim for our use after they have been readied and have had idolatry removed from their mouths, lest they become a snare in our homes. What does that mean? That means that, see, this is the part that you don't know, right? The part that you don't know is what I alluded to before, is that when they come into your homes, they're not, they don't look like non-Jews anymore. They have to get rid of their idolatry, and they have to ship up, because they, in effect, become quasi-Jewish. As we just mentioned, they accept the mitzvahs like a woman. For example, a woman has to keep Shabbos. So your Eved Kanani, who's now quasi-Jewish, has to keep Shabbos. Okay? They have mitzvahs like a woman. So don't think that we just bring them in and they live their old lifestyle in our homes and trip us up and are bad influences on us. It's just the opposite. We influence them to be better. Okay? And that's what he says. And very interesting. And he says, Umihiyos yisod ha-mitzvah kadei sheyirbu b'nei adam ba'avoda sporam baruch hu hitiru chachamim zichron u'brach l'avra al-mitzvah zu b'chol es shabitul mitzvah zui hi agorim l'mitzvah acheres. He says something very interesting. He says, because now that I've given you the reason and the foundation of this mitzvah, i.e., to make people serve their God on a higher level, the Chachamim permitted to break this commandment of not freeing them. You could break it if you need to be Makayim another mitzvah. What in the world is he talking about? So there's a famous Gemara in Maseches Brachos Daf Mem Zayin that he quotes over here. Let's say if you needed a minyan, there was someone davening that was a chova that needed to say Kaddish, and you had 9 people. You had 9 people, and the 10th one was an Eved Kanani. Okay? An Eved Kanani, again, is only quasi-Jewish. He cannot be the 10th Jew. So the Gemara actually says, and this is the proof that the Sefer HaChinuch uses. The proof is that the Gemara in Brachos Daf Mem Zayin says you're allowed to free an Eved Kanani so he could become Jewish and make the 10th person for a minyan. Right? He could become the minyaner. Interesting. Why? He says, he says, hold on a second. Davening with a minyan, that's a derabanan. I mean, it's a great thing to do, but it's not a deoraisa level. that if you don't have a minion, okay, you daven to yourself. But you're telling me that's a d'oraisa enough that you could break a d'oraisa like freeing your slave? Get out of here. He says, no, that's exactly the point. That's the proof that why are the Eveds there? The Avadim are there to help us. So having them help us, this is an example of freeing one in order to help us serve God better. That's his proof that you could actually, or that's his proof of this kind of logic of why we have these Avadim and why we can't let them go unless it's for a higher cause. Okay, I thought that was a bombshell that you should be privy to. Again, Eved Kanani, they don't really come up a lot, but now that we learned a little better in our Gemara, we have an appreciation as to what the mitzvah is all about. And there actually is a very interesting Rambam all the way at the end of Hilchas Avadim. The Rambam says that if you look in that pasuk, very near the pasuk in Bahar that says that we're not allowed to free them, it also says that that by an Eved Ivri you can't overwork. By an Eved Kanani, you can have him perform. It's called avodas farech, right? Like we had in Mitzrayim, right? Avodas farech, excruciating labor. So that's how the Rambam starts. Mutar la'avod, the very last halacha in Hilchas Avadim in the Rambam Mishnah Torah. Mutar la'avod be'eved kanani befarech. When it comes to an eved kanani, you could have him do for you excruciating labor. V'afal pisha hadin kach. Even though that's true, the Rambam says. Now the Rambam is not going to is not going to go to bat for someone who overworks his eved. He says, yes, you can do it on a biblical level. However, right, he's more civil. Midas chasidus v'darkei chachma sheyeh adam rachman v'rodef tzedek v'lo yachbir elo al avdo v'lo yatzer lo v'yacheleu v'yashkeu mikol machal mikol mishteh. Rambam says, what the bottom line is, you should treat him like he's mishpacha. He says, you feed him, you drink him, right? Don't go crazy. Be nice with him. Chachamim harishonim hayanostim la'eved mikol tavshil v'tavshil shayu ochlin, and it's true that the Chachamim of the first generation, when they had slaves, they would actually give them. It's not like slavery, like today. Everybody thinks slavery, right? They were working 24 hours a day, and whatever today's concept of slavery, without getting all political, is, right? That's not what slavery to Jews is. People who don't know anything about Judaism on TV will always say, yeah, well, the Jews had slaves, everyone had slaves, right? The founding fathers had slaves, everyone owned slaves, right? Slaves were treated by Jews historically different. And if you go through Shas, you'll see when it comes to Rabban Gamliel had a slave and he had a slave, and they treated them just about as good as their own children. So that's our secret that the world doesn't have to know, but that's actually the truth. And the Rambam over here goes into it and says, yes, you have to feed them. So they would feed their animals and their slaves before they would eat themselves. Okay? And the Rambam goes on and on and on, and basically says that, at the end, he says a very famous line. He says, we have to emulate God. It says, "V'rachamav kol ma'asav v'kol hamarachim marachmin alav." That's Gemara in Shabbos says, "Kol marachim ala brios." Right? If you have compassion for others, God will have compassion on you. Shenemar v'nasam l'cha rachamim v'yuchamcha v'hirbecha. Right? A pasuk in Dvarim that says that God will have rachamim on you and make you multiply, if assuming that you have it on others. And at the end of the day, these are human beings. So therefore, although the Torah says technically you're allowed to overwork them, but it's not our nature to overwork slaves. And that's a great, way to end that. I do want to go back. There are a couple of reasons why, right? We said before that a slave is compared to a woman by mitzvah ashes shehazman groma. So the Avudraham explains that it's not just a Gzera Shava. There's a little bit, I'll read it in English from the translation of the Avudraham. He says, the reason women are exempt from time-triggered positive commandments is that a woman is subjugated to her husband for the fulfillment of his needs. Again, you have to take this in context. A couple hundred years ago, if she were obligated to perform time-triggered commandments, it might happen that just when she is performing the commandment, her husband will command her to do his bidding. If she were to fulfill the command of the Creator and ignore her husband's command, woe to her from her husband. So take it as you may, but a woman has, at least back then, she had God to deal with and she had a husband to deal with. So therefore, her husband, quote unquote, comes first. So if she were to do a mitzvah, her husband would want her at the same time. Okay, it's not the, it's not the PC reason. It's not the most eloquent of reasons, at least in today's generation, but you could understand from a halachic standpoint where the Avudraham gets his logic. And a more famous from Shimshon Raphael Hirsch about 150 years ago, he said something interesting regarding the mitzvahs hashesh hazman grama. He says is that the Torah didn't impose mitzvos on women, and he says for the main reason is because he didn't think that women necessarily needed them, right? He says that mitzvahs shazman grama are meant by symbolic procedures to bring certain facts, principles, ideas, and resolutions afresh to our minds from time to time to spur us on afresh and to fortify us to realize them, to keep them. God's Torah takes it for granted that our women have greater fervor and more faithful enthusiasm for their God-serving calling, and that this calling runs less danger in their case than in the men from the temptations that the men have. So here you have the opposite, right? This is also one of the reasons that whenever the, at least historically, the whole tefillin, controversy has come up, in the last 10 years about the whole movement of, women and tefillin and why the Ramah says that women shouldn't wear tefillin and so on and so forth. A lot of the opinions, or I should say the majority of the opinions, side with Shimshon Raphael Hirsch in that it's not that you should, be jealous, so to speak. You should be proud. Again, it's easy for me to say than to hear this. So you have to take that also, for what it's worth. But it's not that the women don't have to do it, but the women are on a higher level and for whatever reason, don't need it. We need to do something. We need to put on tefillin to be closer to God. These mitzvahs aseh, shazman grama, for whatever reason, women don't need as much as men do. So they should, in theory, be a little bit prouder than we are. I don't know if that helps, but all I could do is report that this happens to be the famous shita of Samson Raphael Hirsch, and take that as you may. Let us continue. The hour's getting late. I want to talk about the concept now of eruchin, because the Gemara is going to bring up, right? We're jumping to the next idea. We're up to the concept of, if you go back to the Gemara, we're about 15 lines from the bottom. Amar Mar. So the Gemara says, well, I know a Nazir, right? A Nazir can't be a non-Jew because it says B'nai Yisrael, and B'nai Yisrael excludes a Gentile. So the Gemara says, really? What about, it says by Eruchin, it says at the end of Bechukosai, it says Daber B'nai Yisrael. The Tanya, B'nai Yisrael ma'arichin, Ve'en avdei kochavim ma'arichin. Here's an interesting concept. The concept is Eruchin. Eruchin is you make a donation and you say, I want to give the value of myself or of my friend down the block. Okay? So the Torah says, I'll read it in the pasuk. This is the very end of Bechukosai, Sefer Vayikra, chapter 27. Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe lemar, Darel b'nei Yisrael v'mata alehem, ish kiyafli neder be'erkecha nefashos laHashem. A person who makes a vow, right? He makes a vow to God, the equivalent of a human being. He says, I'm going to give the value of a human being. It could either be the value of myself or the value of my neighbor. So the Torah says, well, it depends whose value he wants to give, because everybody has a value, and depending on the two criteria of your sex and your age, the Torah prescribes a certain value to what you are. So, for example, the pasuk goes on to continue. If you're in the 20 to 60 demographic and you're a male, then you give 50 shkolim. If you're 20 to 60 female, you give 30 shkolim. That is your assigned value in terms of making a donation. Okay? So the Gemara says, what if a non-Jew decides to make a donation? Now, we're not going to talk about whether we accept donations for non-Jews. That's a very big discussion, not for now. There's a lot of tshuvas written about if a non-Jew wants to donate to a shul, if he wants to buy a specific thing in a shul and have his name on it. Are we allowed to do it? We're not going to enter that territory, but it is a interesting discussion with many different opinions. We're talking about a non-Jew making a neder to bring the value of someone. So the Gemara says, B'nai Yisrael ma'arichin ve'en avdei kachavin ma'arichin. Yachol lo yeheh ne'erachin. But what if a Jew says, I want to give the value of that person, and that person is not Jewish? So does that vow take effect? Talmud Lomar ish. Okay, so the Gemara says, yes, you can. So the donator cannot be Jewish, but the donatee, the one whose value is being given, does not necessarily have to be Jewish. Okay, and then obviously we want to know, well, how come by a Nazir it's different, because we don't let a Nazir be at all? So Gemara gives a very nice answer. It says, well, there's a special Gzeros HaKasav when it comes to Erech, it says the word Ish. Okay, fine. So now that we brought up the topic of Erechin, because we missed it and it's not coming for about another 4.5 years in Daf Yomi, right? And who wants to wait till 2027? I certainly don't. So therefore, we're going to take a stab at Erechin now and learn a little bit about this obscure topic. So first of all, let's look at the pasuk, because first of all, where is the pasuk? Okay, so the pasuk is in Bechukosai. At the end, right after, if you know Bechukosai, we have Tochacha, which basically says all the bad things that are going to befall the Jewish people, right? And then the destruction and the calamities and burning down the Beis HaMikdash, and you're going to lose this, you're going to lose that. Great. The next pasuk says, by the way, here are the laws of Erech, if you want to make a donation. So we actually brought this up about 2 months ago in the beginning of Nedarim. Is a very beautiful kliyakar. I'm going to say it again because it was so nice. I don't know if anyone remembers it, but the kliyakar wants to know, what in the world does the tochacha have to do with Erechin? Right? We always try to find some similarities when two seemingly unrelated things are juxtaposed in the Chumash. So what could they possibly discuss? What could they possibly have in common? So the Kliyakar says, Samach Parshazu L'Klalas Lomar Yisrael Nodrin based Tzara Ki Yaakov. So you remember Yaakov in the beginning of Vayetze, he says, if God helps me and he saves me and he, right, because he's running away, right, from Esav who wants to kill him, right? So it's called Noder Be'ez Tzara, right? If you make a neder in an Eis Tzara in a time of anguish, right? Right? He says that it's a good thing. So that's exactly why here, when we have all this destruction, and now what happens after all this destruction? We want to say, oh, I wish this never happens to me again. And thank God we came out alive. And right. So whatever ends up happening, your next thing is, that's it. I'm going to donate money. How do I show, how else do I show appreciation to God, right? For saving me, right? For saving my tail, I make a neder. I decide to bring. And that's exactly what the Kli Yakar says over here. What is the biggest influence that makes us give tzedakah? Right? Tsaros. Oh God, if you save me, I'll do X, I'll do Y, I'll do Z, right? Everyone has that moment of, right, the old no atheist in a foxhole moment, right? Please, right? So here we are. When we get saved, we automatically say, okay, that's it, we're giving tzedakah. The Taus shall hanoder al zeh ha'ofen yispar bezos Hashem. So he says, Vaken samach parshas kiyaflu parshas otochacha. He says the opposite. He says, if you bring a neder without having all these great things happen to you, that's even better. So that's the connection between the Tochacha and the Parsha of Erechin, according to the Kli Yakar. So what is this all about? Again, if you want to give money to the Beis HaMikdash, just say, you make a donation in shul. Right? They're having an appeal. You want to donate $180. So you raise your hand. I give $180. Farting. That's it. Why would a person want to make such a donation where he's saying, I want to give my value? What is that all about? Seems kind of strange. So there's a very short Ibn Ezra. The Ibn Ezra says the following. Hata'am sheyidor neder, right? A person is making this neder saying the following. Im Hashem yasel li kach, if God will do the following to me, then efadeh nafshi kedei arki. I'll redeem my life in accordance with its value. Or kedei o erech bini, o erech behema, I will redeem my life according to the value of my son or according to the value of that animal. I want to show appreciation, right? God just saved my tail from something. Okay. If I come out, if I emerge from this, I want to give, it's like a kapara, right? It's like the concept of kofer in Parshas Mishpatim, right? You pay a certain ransom. Every life has a value. So you are saying, I'm giving you, God, my value for saving my hide. That is, in a sense, the way the Ibn Ezra explains what this promise of Erechin is all about. Okay? The Sefer HaChinuch, which you knew we were going to have to talk about because we always bring them down. The Sefer HaChinuch in Mitzvah 350, okay, Mitzvah 350, says he doesn't so much go into this concept of redeeming yourself as much as he, once again, and we've had this, I don't know, at least a half a dozen times in Nedarim and Nazir, talk about how important keeping your word is, right? Just in case you thought that you heard enough about how important keeping your word is, he says, what's the root of this commandment? I'll just say it in English for time's sake. The root of the commandment, that is, since a person only belongs to the higher realm through speech, right? He's saying that, what are we? What separates us is our power of speech. We had this many times, and that's what it's called. The word nefesh chaya, the unclos translate as a talking creature. Mimalel means to speak. He says, the rest of the parts of the body are dead. The only thing that's alive is our mouth. Interesting. Right? And if man loses this good part, his mouth, then the whole body remains dead, like a vessel that's not desirable. Therefore, you're obligated to at least fulfill your speech, whatever you use when it comes to the matters of heaven, such as donating tzedakah, making hegdish, right? Making nidarim. All of those things are the holiest things that could come out of our mouth. Right? And he says, even though there's no particular positive or negative commandment for the right for them, the sages commanded and warned with several warnings that a person should never ever change his word. Okay, Gam tiknu lekalel hamishna bediburo kol zman shenasa be'inyan ma'aseh. And he brings down something that we may not know yet. This is going to be, we're going to talk about this in Bava Metzia in about a year and a half from now. It's called a misha para. A misha para is a curse. The Chachamim actually developed a curse on somebody who changes his word. What does that mean? There's a rule that when you want to acquire something, so you go to the store, the way it works in halacha is you give the cashier $10, right? You get your merchandise. At what point is it actually yours? So you're going to say, well, when I gave him the $10. No. Halacha says you acquire something when you do meshicha. When you grab it, it's yours, even if you didn't pay for it. So the Mishnah says that if you gave the money, right, and the guy and the guy behind the counter didn't give you your merchandise, so you didn't get it. The fact that you paid for it is no proof that you bought it. If he says, I'm going to give it to you, all you have to do is give me the money, and he never does the meshicha, it's not yours. But the Mishnah said that if you make a deal with someone and you technically weasel out of it because the person didn't do a meshicha, that's called you get a misha para. A misha para means that misha para, the one who took retribution from the Dor HaMabul, right? Dor HaMabul were dishonest people, right? Gemara says how they would steal, but they would steal less than a shava pruta. They would somehow figure out a way to steal just the minimum, right, to get away with it. Okay, this concept still is alive today in some way, not important for now. But if you steal little by little, that doesn't get detected by the radar, so technically you can't pull it out of you. But God sees what you did, and it's tantamount to stealing outright. So that's called a mishapara. So that's what the Sefer HaChinuch over here says, that this is the same thing when it comes to tzedakah. When you say to do something, all you have is your mouth. That's the last thing, that's the only living part of you that reflects your actions, right? That reflects what you plan on doing. So if you misspeak, you get this mishapara. So that's how he connects this to. So that's a little bit. We see the Ibn Ezra, right? We see the Sefer HaChinuch. Their discussion about this concept of erechim. So getting back to this whole laws, so we discussed, okay, so if you're 20 to 60, you give this amount. Now, what if you're above 60? So the Torah says, well, when you're, let's say 20 to 60, so a male is worth 50 and a female is worth 30. What if you're 61? Right? So the male is worth 20 and the female is worth 15. So the Gemara actually picks up.
No. It's all.
What?
The female goes down to 10.
It's 15 to
30
10.
to
I'm
10.
sorry. No, it goes from, what do you call it?
Male goes from 50 to 15.
50 to 15.
The female goes from 30 to 10.
Right. Okay. Fine.
That's the whole
I'm
point.
sorry. It goes from 15 to 10, right? Not from 20 to 15, it goes from 15 to 10. So we did this together, if you remember, in Erech and Yutes. Anyway, so we're going to get to that, but let's look in Rashi. Rashi says on the pasuk, he says, let's find it if we can. Nope, I don't have it. The Rashi quotes the Gemara in Erech and Daf Yutes. What does the Gemara in Erech and Daf Yutes say? Maishta nekeva. Why is it when it comes to a woman, right? When she is 60, right? If she's past 60, kaima atilsa, okay, she goes down, right? 1/3 of her value, right? She goes from 30, right, to 10. That's a third. But the male is worth 50, he goes to 15. The proportion is a little bit off by about 4 or 5%. The woman actually gains when it's past 60 because proportionate, she should be a third of, all right, the male should be a third of 50, right? A third of 50 is 50 thirds, which is 16, or whatever, it's 16.3. Okay, he's only 15. So you're going to laugh and say, what are we wasting our time for? The Gemara picks up on it, though. Why is an older woman worth more, past 60? So says the Gemara, the male, though his proportionate is off. Amar Chizkiya, Amar Inshi, Saba bebesa, Pacha bebesa, Safta bebesa, Sima bebesa. When an old man is in the house, he's more of a burden than a woman. When an elderly woman is at home, it's a sima. The word sima is a name. It's also Aramaic for the word Rashi says matmon, a treasure. There's a treasure in the house. Why? Because she helps. An older woman is more useful than an older man. We're going to leave Jackie Mason and all comedians aside for this because that's a whole different discussion. But the question is why? So the Chizkuni picks up on this, and he says the following. He says, Masha Kasav Poches Ma'ako Shel Zaken Mikamo Shahaya Keshahaya Bachar Yotel Misha Isha Hainu Taima. Why is it that it's disproportionate? Why does the Torah favor women that are above 60? Lefi Shedarku Shel Ish Lihios Emunaso Lefi Kocho Malacha Kaveda. Because what is a man more, what does he tend to do more, right? He is heavier physical labor than a woman. So, but that's only up to a certain point. You can't do heavy physical labor forever. So 60 is the cutoff point. Now there's a whole discussion that the Levium only worked until 50, whatever. We're not going to discuss what halacha or when halacha deems you to retire. It's not a discussion for now. This is more on the agadic sense. But in regard to physical labor, up until 60, a man is useful. When men age, their ability to perform heavy labor, right, declines, says the Chizkuni, Avala Isha Darka Be'emuna Kala. What has a woman been doing all these years? She's always been doing less work. So therefore, when she's older, past 60, she can do lighter tasks as opposed to the man, right? The man has, so to say, been beaten down all his life. The woman has been used to it. So that's the reason why it's a bracha for a bubby, right? And not the zayda to be at home. Okay, that's one way to look at it. There's a very beautiful medrash that we're going to end with, just in the right amount of time. I saw this medrash. I've heard about it a long time ago, and I was able to locate it, and I want to read it. The medrash is discussing the pasuk in Eov. It says, "Kipoal Adam Yishalin Lo." That a person's actions will be paid back to him. What does that mean? Zeh Moshe. This is referring to Moshe. I'm reading from Vayikra Rabbah in Parshas Bechukosai. The pasuk in Shmo says, "Vahi b'yamim ahem vayigdal Moshe vayetze el achav vayar b'sivlotam." So the pasuk says that Moshe grew up in the house of Paro. He went out to his brothers and he saw in the distance, and then it says he saw an Egyptian beating a man. He says, "Why are you hitting him?" Blah blah. So the Medrash actually says that he saw besivlotam, right? The word besivlotam, like is like a burden. So he saw something. So the Torah doesn't say what Moshe actually saw. So ma ra'a masui ish al isha, umasui gadol al katan, umasui bachur al zakeh. Moshe saw something he didn't understand. He saw that the Egyptians were having the, let's call it like when you're bench pressing, right? So someone in very good condition can bench press, let's say 250 pounds. A beginner should bench press 40 pounds, let's say, right? You don't mix and match, right? The man should be carrying the 200-pound bag, and the woman, if she has to work, should be carrying the 50-pound bag. Paro did the exact opposite. For older people and younger people, and for men and women, he swapped. So the men had light loads, and the women had heavy loads, right? And the bachur, the younger person who could handle more, had the light load, and the zaken, the older person, was holding the 250-pound load. So what did Moshe do? V'yishev lahem sivlosam ben ish leisha ben kadol lekatan ben bachur lezaken. Moshe snuck and rearranged everything. He gave the woman what she should have, what she should carry, and she gave the man what he should carry. Amalo Kadosh Baruch Hu, God said to him, "Wow, ata yishavta levanai sivlotam. You rearranged everyone's peckles, right? Chayecha she'ata atid liyashav ulefarish levanai. You will be zocha to explain to my children one day. Nidreim ben ish leisha ben gadol lekatan. You will be able to explain one day this concept of erechim, that a man and a woman are different when it comes to values, and a bachur and a zaken are different, and a male and a female, depending on your age, a 50-year-old woman doesn't have the same value as a 62-year-old woman, and a 5-year-old boy doesn't have the same value as a 25-year-old kid, right? They each have different values. And he quotes the pasuk in Bechukosai. This medrash, when I saw it, is just dripping of curiosity. What in the world is the point of this medrash? So I was wondering, and I think what the point over here is God teaches us how to value people, right? Where do people fit in? And more importantly, where do people not fit in, right? Today, everyone says, we talk about having values. That's the noun, but the verb value, right, is how do you value something? What is a person worth? So in the real world, a person is worth what the actuary says this person can make. So if you have a center on a basketball team, he could make $7 million a year, right? But then unfortunately, you have firefighters and police, and right, this is the old argument, right? And school teachers that make $62,500 that contribute more to society, right, than LeBron James. But the problem is LeBron James makes $29.5 million, and a school teacher makes $62,500. The answer is, right, that ends the argument, is that there's only 600 basketball players in this country. There are 300,000 teachers. So this is supply and demand, right? So that's the answer we give about what a person's worth is. But is that really what the value of a person is, right? Moshe over here was able to go beyond that and understand, how am I going to get the best benefit, the best bang for the buck? So what's the problem? The problem by the woman carrying the load of a man is that she's going to crumble. But what's the problem of a man carrying the load of a woman? He's not going to crumble. The answer is that is what we call wasted potential. So you have two problems. You have one person's gonna drop, and the other person is not going to drop dead, but there's wasted potential. So you have a problem in each direction. And in Moshe's brilliance, he was able to swap it so everybody in the end has their proper value. And I think that's really the message of this medrash, is that the way Moshe figured this out, God also figured us out where we have our proper values. And if you think about it, if you ask around, being that, we always talk about sports, metaphors, they always say that the hardest job in all of sports is the baseball manager and the baseball GM, because most of their in-game planning and roster building all comes into that discussion of, how do I find value in a person? I have a person, where do I bat him in the lineup, right? The cleanup hitter who hits 58 home runs is not going to bat ninth because he's a waste, right? And the ninth place hitter who's batting only 210 can't lead off because he's not going to get on base. So everybody has a certain value at what they're good at, and that's why the hardest job is IT people. You speak to them, they say, how do I find talent and where could I put them? So a lot of that all goes back to this medrash of what Moshe was able to do. And as the medrash ends beautifully, because Moshe was able to figure this out, he was zocheh to teach the Jewish people that we all have different values, but in the eyes of God, if you fall into this category, our spiritual value is what is prescribed in the Torah. And on that note, I say good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night.
Questions?